One of the questions that people have is, should I try to get land cheaper by buying with a group of people? Is this a good idea or a bad idea? Well, it could be either one. We're going to talk first about some of the benefits of doing it, and then I'm going to talk about how to avoid making potentially this one of the worst decisions of your life. Hey everybody, Chad Cruiser here with Health and Homestead. And you might watch the first few points on how this could be great and just run off and do it, but I'm going to share the potential dangers that could be terrible, so watch all the way to the end. Obviously, one of the benefits is that you can get more acreage per dollar. What I mean by that is, now this is an extreme case. Most of the time it's not going to work out like this, but I was just recently looking on Zillow and saw around 2,000 acres for $2 million. Now, obviously that you do the math and that ends up being $1,000 an acre, which sounds phenomenal to someone who's buying an acre, but you're not going to find 2,000 people to do that. But you get the idea. If you had 10 people, you could have 200 acres for $200,000. But remember, there's more to think about. One of the other reasons that people buy land together is because you sometimes have older people who maybe are more financially well off, and you have younger people, and the older folks need some help around the homestead. And so you can see how there could be benefits by helping each other out, or even if people are the same age, but helping each other out is one of the reasons it can be beneficial to buy land together. Another thing is that you may be able to get better land because of all this money coming together. You might be able to get better ground. Maybe it'll have a nice creek or a water source or a river or something like that. And that makes it so that you might be able to get something that you otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford. One of the things that people consider doing when they're having multiple people buy a piece of ground together is they make, if there's like a nice area, maybe a beautiful view or right by the river, sometimes they will make deeded access so that each person that owns a piece of ground on this particular parcel of ground that you're dividing up is able to use a specific area. Now, honestly, I wouldn't do something like that. I understand if somebody's just making a subdivision, that can be a great idea, but personally, you realize that can create all kinds of trouble down the road. Okay, these are some of the benefits, but what are the negatives? One of the negatives can be, let's say I heard a situation, I don't remember the exact number, but it was like 20-some families got together and they bought a piece of ground, and I did the math, I don't remember what it was between like 4 to 7 acres a person. And your average person, 4 to 7 acres sounds great, but if you end up legally dividing that between all of you, what part of that acreage are you going to get? Meaning, maybe you'll get a steep hillside, or maybe you'll get an area of that happened to be swampland. You have to look into that beforehand. If you just think, oh, we'll just get together, we'll buy this thing, we'll figure it out later, well, you could be in for a heap of trouble from some, serious bad feelings as a result, and also, you may be struggling financially because you put your money into this situation, and now what do you do with it? Another danger is people might say, hey, we can just all go in this together, and hey, we're going to have this thing for the rest of our lives, so we don't have to worry about divvying it up. We'll just all have this kind of in common. That would be great, wouldn't it? No, that's going to be a living nightmare doing something like that. And so you want to make sure that this is legally divided up. And imagine you don't legally divide it up. Let's say you do have 20 families get together and just have this communal property. Oh, that sounds great. Like I said, no, it actually sounds like a nightmare. But here's the thing. So let's say one of those 20 families, let's say you put, I don't know, $50,000 into this property, and each of you put $50,000 in, and so you're there for a year, and then you realize, I want out. Well, the trouble is, this is just one big piece of land. You haven't done anything to divide it up, and you say, well, I want my money back. They say, no, we put our money into this. We're going to be here for the rest of our lives, and so now you have money into this, but you can't get anything out of the deal. That would be something that nobody wants that in the end, so don't go about doing it that way. So what you need to do is you need to make sure that you legally divide this piece of property into something that you want. You want to know beforehand, you're looking at this thing, you have, okay, there's 500 acres here, and I'm going to get 20, you're going to get 20, and you make sure beforehand what section you're going to get, and you need to make legally sure that you're going to get that section of the land when you do it. or else you have no idea. You may get the leftovers. Another thing to consider that is not necessarily a negative, it's just something you need to consider if you do end up going in with multiple people into a property, is that when you legally divide it, there is a cost associated with that. You're going to typically have a surveyor, going to have to go through the legal paperwork to legally divide it, and that is an additional cost. So if you're thinking, oh, I'm getting 200 acres for $200,000, which you're probably not going to get that, but I'm just using that as an illustration. The dividing costs are going to be tacked on top of that, so it's just recognize that there's additional fees that you need to consider. Okay, so we've talked about the potential positives, and we've also talked about some of the dangers, but now I want to talk about how to mitigate some of those dangers. The first one I've already mentioned, but you have to legally divide, and you may have to get a contract with a lawyer, but somehow you have to figure out the legal process to be able to divide this land, and a handshake is not good enough. I know man's as good as his word, or a handshake used to be all that you needed. Well, it's not that way anymore, and I don't know that it really was totally ever that way. It should be that way, but it's not. And so you have to make sure you legally divide. I have a friend who actually kind of went into this with someone. Someone had bought 200 acres, and they promised my friend, as he was working the land and doing agricultural work there, and he was promised that he could pick any 20 acres on the property later on. And so he was putting everything he could into it, putting in the work, and finally the people said, well, actually, we're going to sell now. And he had already been on there, put his money into it, put effort into it, and he said, okay, so I can take my 20 from the 200. And they said, no, we're selling the whole thing as 200. And so they simply lied. And you think, well, you shouldn't lie. Well, you shouldn't lie, but people do. And when it comes to money, people do funny things. And so that's why contracts legally declared, signed, and ratified by law, that's important. So don't make that mistake. Another thing to consider is that if you do go and buy a large parcel with multiple people, you have to make road access into the property, or a way to get in. If it's not just right off the road and you have access by that, but if it's big enough where you have to make a pathway into it, you need to make legal deeded access somehow in the document so that there's no question how you're going to get to your property. Because let's say it's a square and you have a bunch of squares within that square. Well, maybe the one that's adjacent to the road, those people have no problem accessing this property. But what about you further back? Somebody might say, well, hey, we never gave you legal deeded access, and so you have your property is not even accessible. So now you can't get to your property. And once again, you may think, well, people, if they promise, then I should have access. That's why you need to make sure it's legit. Now, this one goes with any piece of property that you're looking to buy, whether it already has a house or whether it's just a piece of land, is that you want to look where the flood zones are. The great thing is that on Realtor.com, you get a good idea of where it is. It may not be exact there, but it'll give you an idea typically, and you need to check, is the area that I'm going to have in a flood zone? Because it may look beautiful in a nice August day in the summer when it's all dry, and then, all of a sudden maybe the rains of fall come along, or the spring, and that property is flooded and it's totally useless. It's not worth a dime to you as a result. And so make sure that you look into, is it in a flood zone? So two things that kind of fit together also is, number one, you need to look into the dividing regulations in your area. Depending where you are, some areas may say you cannot divide a parcel into smaller than 5 acres. Some may say 10, some may say 20 or 40 acres. And so let's say you're buying 80 and you got, 8 people going into this thing, and then it turns out you can only divide it into 40-acre sections. Now you only have 2. And now what are you going to do? You already put your money into this thing. So find out what the legalities are in your area about how much it can be divided. Another thing to consider is the zoning of the area that you're looking in also. Can you do on this property what you want to do? Meaning maybe you're someone who runs a home business, but in this particular area, the zoning does not allow that. Now, if you're far enough out in the country, hopefully that's not an issue, but it could be. And so check out the regulations, the zoning in your particular area to make sure that you can have on your property what you want. One of the most important issues of buying a property is water. And does this property have water? Can you get a well? Does it already have something? And there's an old saying, drink waters out of thine own cistern and running waters out of thine own well. It is possible to have a shared water source on the property, like a well that goes to multiple houses, but if at all possible, I would not suggest that. Personally, I want a property where you either have a spring or a well or personally, I'm not looking to have a municipal water source. If you want that, more power to you, but I want to be able to have access to my own water, and so a well for me is going to be the most usual option. Obviously, a spring would be great, but you're less likely to find that on a property. You might find it, and if you do, that's fantastic. But can you get water? And, what are the costs of a well? Because, some areas it may be $75,000 or $100,000 for a well in certain areas. Could be more. Some areas it's going to be, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. So it's not that significant. Obviously, that's money, but it's not $100,000. And so find out in the area what are going to be the potential costs for a well. At least getting an idea, because you may think, oh, I'm getting a great deal, but if the well costs more than the property and you don't have that much money, well, that might hinder you from being able to build on that property anyway. Another potential negative side effect is your neighbors just wanting to get into your business, or they're just in your business too much. You were looking for that peace and quiet of the countryside, and now you got, family, friends, whoever, continually in your business. And hey, I love family, friends, but too much in your space can kind of get uncomfortable. And I've read this saying that it's often not wise for families with small children to be very close for that exact reason, that getting into each other's business can be troubling. And by the way, I want to be very clear. I am not suggesting that you do this. I just say this because I have heard of people doing this. I have heard of the trouble and the pain and the suffering and the financial hardship. Losing out on your life savings as a result of something like this. So I am not telling you to go out. I'm not necessarily suggesting that you do this, but I am saying this so that if you do, that you hopefully don't fall into the terrible situation that others have gone through before you. Learn from their mistakes and don't make them yourself. And if you have any other suggestions on why it might not be a good idea or why it would be better to avoid it, or maybe you did have a good experience and you'd like to share that, I'd like you to share that down below in the comments section. If you like this video, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notifications, and make sure to check out this video right here. You don't want to miss it. God bless and have a fantastic day.